Hello, and welcome to another Monday. Speaking of, I missed last week, and I'm sorry about that. We had a couple of family bits and bobs to deal with, and I had to choose what I was capable of doing that week. So, unfortunately, quite a lot got pruned off, but back now and hopefully make up for it this week. Okay, I've got a couple of things actually to talk about this week, and one of them is offcuts of paper. And trust me, it's quite relevant to what I want to do today. And I buy my paper. I'm a mixed media artist, as you probably know if you've watched a few of my videos. So I buy my paper in large sheets. I don't know the exact size, but it's going on 1 metre by 1/2 metre. So you can get a fair few good cuts from the piece of paper. But it doesn't matter how I do it, because every single time I make a cut, it's different. I'm usually left with an offcut. And this time I was left with a 6-inch strip down one side. So what I did was I cut these into 6x4-inch postcards. And I bought some really, really cheap passe-partouts off Amazon. And that meant that I ended up with small sketches, which were fabulous for if you want to sell something a little bit cheaper, or sell it, and to be able to afford a decent frame, or even a not so decent frame. I'll get to that in a second. But what I did was, these were about €2.50 for a packet of the passe-partouts or mount board, pre-cut and all that sort of thing. So perfectly fits in those offcut bits. These were my Strathmore watercolour postcards, but it's the same size, so it's the same thing. So have a think about different sizes for your work. You probably already have. And I mean, especially if you live in a smaller house, you don't want everything massive scale. It's more expensive to frame. It takes a lot of everything. It takes a lot of time too. So if you want something quite quickly, using offcuts like that are really, really handy. I'm sure you've already thought of that, but I thought I would mention it just in case not. Sometimes it's also nice to be reminded about things. And that sort of brings me to frames as well. Frames can get expensive, especially if you do want to sell your work and you have to actually factor in the cost of the frame, and then the person you buy it for or sell it to might not like it. Because frames are intensely personal, and some people love gilt or ornate old-fashioned frames, others just want plain black. And there is a world of framing possibility in between the two. So I try to stay out of the framing debate by I mount it so that people can see what the picture looks like, and it's half done. They can then take this to a framer and get it framed, or they can just buy a frame off the internet. Again, Amazon's got some great ones, and pretty cheap but quite decent wooden frames, and I use them all the time. So why this size is important, and what this is about 8 inches by 6 inches, or 8 inches by 6 inches. Why this is important is because sometimes when you do an offcut, and this was the point I really need to make, is don't make your offcuts to suit yourself. I know that sounds really rude, because I mean, who else would we be suiting? If we can't be the star of our own show, who is? No, my best bit of advice for you is, if you're on a tight budget, and even if you're not and just don't want to waste a lot of money, check which frame sizes are standard before you make your cuts, always with paper, because you can save a lot of money by buying a bigger sheet of paper, or even some of the pads that you can cut down to different sizes. But check to see that the frame is a standard size, otherwise you will pay a hell of a lot of money to get something framed. And I guarantee you, you won't, it doesn't matter what you do, that will be your best painting ever, and it'll be the one that you really, really want to frame, and the frame will cost extortionate amounts if you can find them. I mean, you can always get them handmade, but it's not cheap. So do check before you make your pre-cuts. So 6x4 goes into an 8x6 passe-partout or mount board unit, whatever you want to call it. They're called different things in different places. And it means that you will get a decent frame at a pretty good price from Amazon. And like I said, I'm using the black wooden ones. They're just plain black wooden photo frames. They've got a bit of glass in them. You can hang them either landscape or portrait format, and that's all you need. So yeah, check your sizes first. So these are some that I have done on offcuts and, well, Strathmore postcards, but also offcuts. And as you can see, they're a nice quick sketch. It's really difficult to see the scale on camera, but they're not big. Probably see next to my palette there. They're not huge, and they make great gifts. Like I said, you can buy a cellophane packet to put them in to protect them if you want to sell them, and you can sell them like this, and people just go and get their own frames. So that's a really good way to get that particular job done. Totally recommend this, and you use every little bit of your offcuts, but do check that your sizes are standard first. I've made that mistake myself before, where I've cut a piece of paper and I thought this is exactly the size I want. It fits the place I want to put it, except you can't buy the frame in that size, so you end up having to spend a lot more money. Right, that's that bit. So I'm working on an offcut today instead of a sketchbook, and I've made a little scene here, the best sort of scene to make really is in art. And I'm a bit obsessed at the moment with sunsets, and I've always had a bit of a problem. Actually, they've been my nemesis because I've never felt happy about what I've created. I've done one here on another piece of this offcut, and I'm actually a lot happier with this now. And I think there are two things to look at if you're finding that your sunsets are looking really kitsch and horrid looking, because they really can. Orange is a powerful colour, so you can actually get an effect that you're not very proud of. But there are two things to consider for me that worked. One was the colours that I used, and as you probably know if you followed my work for any length of time, I like a nice muted colour palette. And the greens are super important. If your greens are too bright and you then add an unadulterated orange out of the tube or whatever you're using, the results are going to be really, really terrible. At least they were when I was holding the brush. You may have cracked it, but I certainly could not. I didn't achieve any success until I muted the whole thing down. Now, I won't go into lots of greens today because I've actually got a video tutorial on my Patreon about greens, and what it specifically talks about is if you've either bought a set of colours or been gifted a set. And it's highly likely, because although we tend to want to buy open stock, some things just aren't available with open stock, and other times you might be gifted, like I said, a set, or you might buy one because it represents really great value to buy a set of colours, but there are going to be colours in there that you don't like. They're too bright, they're just not you, they're just not right. And out of my experience over several decades of this and making mistakes, I've found that the greens are usually the biggest culprit, and they will let your work down. So if you want to, there's a link in the description box below, usual deal. So if you want to know more about mixing, because it's a pity not to use the colours, it's a worse pity to throw them away or give them to somebody else only to find out you could have used them. It's a simple fix. Anyway, we shall move swiftly on. I'm using my very, very messy palette here of gouache to start with, and that's my usual go-to. I normally start with gouache as a substrate and then use my coloured pencils and markers over the top, and there's not a lot of deviation from this. So I've got a simple little landscape here because that's an excellent way to show you what's going on. And I'm using a number 10 Dome Blender brush. The reason for that is, as you can see, it's already quite scrubby and frayed and fluffed out. Doesn't matter. It doesn't care, and neither do I. You can still use it. Don't have to worry about the tips. So if you've got an old brush that's a bit manky looking, or one that you don't mind ruining, this is a great way to go about it. Right. It's a great thing to use. Sorry, I'm having complete verbal diarrhea today. Just can't say two words together of sense. I've started with an apricot. There's a tiny bit of grey in the apricot. I'm not worried about that because it helps to grey the colour down and make it a little less poisonous looking. Putting some white near the horizon here, because the sun is going to sit around about there, and the light is always going to be more sort of pale towards the horizon as the sun slips around the curvature of the earth, which is what we want here. So just washed my brush there. You don't need to, but I have, and I'm going in a warm grey up the top, and just keep it streaky. Don't over mix. I don't mind my gouache being a little bit muddy. I've said that before several times. That's actually why I like it. It's why a lot of people don't like it, but I find that that is one of its most endearing qualities, is the fact that it can be a little bit muddy. I like to call it muted, but if you're not into it, you might call it muddy. Right, not washing my brush, so not getting rid of that grey, but just picking up some white and going into a blue. I don't want too much blue. I just want a little bit more than that, though. The merest hint in the sky. And as you'll see, I'm painting, keeping it stripy. And because that, quite often when you've got a sky and it's got some interest in it, and colour, it's going to be stripy. It's going to be textured. I know you can get a completely flat grey. You can get a completely flat blue. You can get all sorts of colours, and at night even flat. I tend not to do that. I tend to try to keep some texture in the sky even. So that's what I've attempted to do here. And like I said, you've got to be careful with this blue. It's quite, there we go, quite bright. That's all right. Me doing that now is a great way to show you how to fix it. So what I've done is I've washed my brush, and before it dries, I'm just going to blend it through here. Not only is that not terrible, nobody dies, it's also right near the green, and I can blend it into that. Okay, onto the green. I mix green by putting indigo, darkest brown, darkest green together, and I mix a particular colour that apparently is becoming quite known for my work, and I like that. People have said they know, a couple of people have been kind enough to say they knew it was my work because of the green I used. So that's good, because this is my favourite of all the greens. I'm just going to put a little bank of trees here with some trunks. I want to say stems, but we both know. We all know it's not a stem on a tree. And I'm going to keep my brush quite dry. I'm actually okay to go off the edge here, but if you're working on your best dining table, do not. Gouache is pretty good actually, because you can get rid of it. So, but I'm not being fussy or precious about this table. I'm deliberately allowing it to be quite streaky. And down here, I want another little bit of foreground interest. So pop some of that in, keep it dark. What I had in mind here in the foreground was a bit of a lake. Feels quite weird actually, because that doesn't look like a tree, it looks like a loaf of bread. Let's give it some interest. I can put some in too with my coloured pencils, and that's usually where I repair my mistakes. So keeping that streaky for now, letting it dry, and like I said, I've got in mind here to have a bit of a lake. So lakes and water, any sort of water, even if it's just a bucket of water, will reflect the sky. So you really can't get away with a orange and grey sky and a blue bit of water, because it's not reflecting correctly, unless there's a bit of blue in the sky that you can't see in your picture, in which case it's going to look slightly odd because it's not believable. We're not going realistic here. This is not photorealism, but we're trying to look believable. So I've got to go back into this apricot again. And again, it's dirty apricot, and I've now got green around the place. I don't mind that at all. Bit of grey up the top here. Be aware too that when you're not working in a sketchbook, I'm used to the sketchbook that doesn't have to be held down or move around. I could have taped it down, but then I can't move it if I need to. So yeah, it's all up in the air. When you're doing this, you're going to lose a little bit of the edge when you put it in the passe-partout, and that can be as about 1/4 inch. You're probably ideal, maybe even more sometimes if your paper's just not quite right. So don't put any of your favourite details right on the edge. A bit more apricot there, a bit too much water. This brush's great disadvantage is it holds masses of water and will happily just drop it everywhere. Okay, we can bring that back with our coloured pencils in a second. What I want to do now is glaze over here, and I'm going to use a different green. This one is one that's pretty much straight from the tube, which is rare for me, but I just want to blend this in and get rid of the white now. But I've let the bottom dry, because although the gouache is still being upset and moved around, and you can see the dark on my brush, it's a bit slower to react to what I'm putting over the top by letting it dry first. It doesn't take long, and with very light strokes and no messing around, so you don't get to come back and do it again. It's a one and done type deal. Otherwise you just mess it up and make it all really gungy. There's muddy and there's just wrong. See, as you can see here, if I want to blend, I can, just by reactivating that, but being very careful. That is for leaving alone at the moment. So what I'm going to do now again is dry that. Just what I'm using is a heated craft tool by Ranger, which I use for my card making, but it's also really good for this. And if you find your paper buckles, turn it over and do the back, because it'll go the other way. And when it feels warm to the touch, it's dry. If you've got any cool spots, it's not dry, so be careful for that. Right, we have pretty much got rid of all the gouache areas now, done those. So the next thing is coloured pencil. Okay, I have changed the camera angle and gotten rid of some of the fluff around here, bits and pieces that don't need to be out, so that you can see what I'm doing. Quite often when people watch my videos and see what I do, they say, look, I've tried that, the idea of putting gouache down and then going over the top with coloured pencil, and it never works. I've bought all the brands, I've bought everything that you're using, and I'm trying to follow along, and it's not worked. One of the top reasons that it will not work, if you're finding that your strokes just aren't nice and bright and richly pigmented, is the fact that it's not dry. If there's any moisture at all, it's not dry. The pencil just won't go over the top of it. Markers won't like it. Nothing will like it. So better to wait and dry it properly than have some sort of disappointing sort of mishap. Like I said, dry both sides. Even if you're working in a sketchbook, flip it over, dry the back as well. But what happens, especially with thicker, better quality papers, is the moisture from your wet layer, gouache or watercolour or markers or whatever it is. So even if you were using markers like these, this is a Molotov Aqua brush, or you might use an Ecoline marker, any of those, they're quite juicy and they've got a lot of water in them. So what that's doing is going into the paper, you dry it and you're thinking, yep, that's good, I can go, great. No, it's now got to evaporate, and it's trying to evaporate, and the only way it can evaporate is through the surface here, which means that the moisture's come back to the surface again. And see, even with that, it's cool. I know this is dry, it's still cool, but it's room temperature because it's not very warm today. But if you can feel areas that are cooler than others, suspect that there may be a bit of not undried material there, and that will affect your next sort of steps. So hopefully that helps, because that is an often repeated sort of grumble that people say, look, it just doesn't work. I bought all this expensive stuff and I still can't do it. It's got to be dry. Right, now the next thing is we work from back to front in a sketch. So we're going to look here. See, as you can see here, this was a complete accident. Mind you, I could claim I did it on purpose. This is where I'm going to put the sun, because there's a little bit of a brighter spot there. So with my Chinese white Derwent drawing pencil, I'm just drawing in a round disc. And you can go onto this here, because this round disc is the sun, and it will be lighting that area there. So that's just to preserve where the sun has gone. Now, yeah, I know I've done everything wrong in this picture. Horizon's almost in the middle. Now the sun's in the middle as well. Doesn't matter. I don't care, and neither does anybody else. If people get hung up on those details, I don't know, maybe they're trying to sound a lot cleverer than they are, but please don't stress about it. Things happen the way they happen, and if you want to look at a picture and put the subject in the middle, do it. Those rules don't seem to apply anymore. I think there are more important things for us to get caught up in. Right, rant over. I'm going to try and find a nice soft pink. What can I find here? Anthraquinoid pink. That's exactly the same as that. I appear to have bought that one 4 times, which is typical of me. Let's go for a burnt ochre 10% in Caran d'Ache, because what I want to do is just lightly bring some of this colour up, and it's very similar to the apricot that I used. Why I'm doing this is because this prevents me from going too strong with these other colours. And anthraquinoid pink is quite bright. I'm barely touching the surface. But what I've just done with that other pencil is to protect a bit of it and stop it from getting too strong and horrid looking. Because I want a bit of pink in this. And keeping it streaky. Bit down here too, because it's going to reflect the same thing, but we can come back to that. Let's keep it simple. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to go in with my Chinese white that I use for the sun, and over the top of that pink and the other colour, just blend that in. Try not to get it on the trees. And sometimes we can make the white a bit darker to allow for clouds that might be still lit there by the sun. The next thing is an orange pencil. It's no fancy name, just orange. It's another Caran d'Ache Luminance. And again, glazing over that. Trying not to glaze onto the sun. Don't really want to do that. And then into the sky. And then again, back in with the white. And burnish that down. Really push the fibres and the tooth of the paper down. Under here, I don't want to do too much under there. I have a plan for there. And I have a light aqua pencil here, which means that I can blend some of this blue up into here and push back some of the darker colour there. Now, I wouldn't do that in a picture, just put it on one side. I would also introduce it on the other. I tend to do that in a picture. Don't ever do something just in one spot unless it's something amazing. For example, you can't put 2 suns into a picture like this. That would look ridiculous. We know there's only one. There it is. But with colours, if you use a colour in one area, use it in another, because it looks a little bit more coherent then. Right, I'm going to leave the sky because there may be more to be done there, because I want to start bringing a bit of a glow into these trees. And before I start, my forest pencil, this is a Derwent Lightfast, and it's one of my favourites, but it's not going to work there. I'm going to use a black one instead, Caran d'Ache. I want something quite sharp that's not a marker to get some of these trees to have trunks and not have this funny sort of cloud, dark green cloud floating above the horizon. When you do things like this, you can see actually the context then of what it is you're trying to do. Now, I've also got some colours on there. I need to get rid of those. Just flip that around. I'm using my green ochre pencil. Now, normally with my paintings, I have a thing about the light coming from the left. I can't this time because the light's in the middle, and it's very obviously in the middle. Normally you can't see the sun in the sky. You can look at it, but in paintings it's never there. It's implied. So if you've got red, good grief, God knows where my brain went then. If you've got a blue sky and it's just daylight, you would have just a blue sky with daylight. You wouldn't paint the sun in. I mean, the days where we paint the sun up here in bright yellow and then a strip of blue sky just along the top, that finishes when we leave primary school. We now understand that the sky goes right to the horizon and we don't see the rest of it because, again, it's under the curvature of the earth. but you're not going to see the sun. You'll see the moon at night, and you can put that in, and that's reasonably accepted. And you only put the sun actually into a picture at day sun up or sundown. The rest of the time it's just implied. It's up there in the firmament and it's lighting the earth, and you can see the effects of the sun, but not the actual sun itself, if that makes sense. But here we can actually get away with it playing a starring role, and we also see the effects of it. So what I'm doing here with my green ochre is to just highlight the tops of those trees and bushes. Highlight this as well, a bit there. I'm also going to use it on here, which means I can keep all that lovely texture from the gouache, but just highlight it a bit more. I'm going to highlight the bottoms of the trees here a bit more than the tops. They'll both get some treatment. And again, with my forest pencil, Derwent Light Fast Forest, come in here, knock some of this back. You can go over it, make it a bit more subtle. Try to see, I'm going to lose nearly all that tree, so basically all of that's going to be gone, so no point putting too much effort into it. These sorts of things is where you see that sketchbook work and actual out in the real world work is very, very different, because in a sketchbook I could paint from edge of page to edge of the page and keep absolutely everything and have a little thing peeking in the side and it'll still be there. When you frame something, you're going to lose quite a bit on the edges, and budget for about 1/4 of an inch minimum. If in doubt and you are going to a framer, ask them how much you lose so that you can keep away from the edges. Right, just putting some forest into that bit, and then I'm going to go back with my green ochre and do the same thing. Now, as I said, light travels in straight lines. So here's the light. It's going to be traveling out in straight lines, hitting things. So there'll be shadows caused here, and there'll be a bit of a shadow there. There'll be a lot of shadow here. But I don't want it to be just a black blobby shape. It doesn't look any good. In a picture, it looks better. Actually, I'll keep that same one. If you put a bit of texture in. Some of this you're going to lose, like I said, but quite a bit you'll see. And it's better than having just that blob, which would actually be more realistic. Actually, if you were outside at sunset, you will see the trees as blobs because that's how the sun works. But here in a painting, we get to put some colours in. Right, this is a yellow ochre Derwent drawing. And I just want to add a bit to these, a bit of glow on the edge there. Especially here where the sun is, a bit more there, and I can come back and put some of those shadows back in appropriately in a minute. Here especially because it's hitting that directly. Gosh, I think the postman's just coming. I can hear my dog barking. So if you can hear barking in the background, that is Daisy. A little bit here where it's not hidden by the tree. That's still a bit of a blobby tree, but you can get them. Here's one. Right, just a little bit more. I don't want the trees to be too perfect. Right, and up the back here, I would probably go with, let's go with the same colour that we've used in the sky originally, which was the burnt ochre 10%, and put some branches in. Now again, you wouldn't see this in real life because this bit would be quite dark, but I don't want it to be dark and dead like a bottomless pit. So just some branches there. And if you find the branches are too bright, even with coloured pencil, just rub them a bit with your finger because that will knock them back a bit. You can do it here too. Add some more in. Here, maybe a little bit. Let's have a look and see. This is an imaginary picture, so it doesn't matter. This place doesn't exist, sadly. It's probably a conglomeration of things that my brain has seen over the years. Yeah, and just knock them back so that they're there but not there. Okay, next, back with the forest pencil. You're going to get, and I'm using the pencil on its side here, to cover the area but still give me some texture. There's going to be a bit of shadow there. There's going to be a bit of shadow here and here. And here, they're going to be long shadows. I'm going to also get some of these branches coming out, and then back in with the green ochre. The colour requirements are actually quite small for this sort of picture. It feels a lot, but it isn't. I've used about 4 coloured pencils so far, maybe a little more than that, but not many. Bit of shade there, but we want yellow ochre. The sun will be creating a bit of a glow here. And you can only see that glow if it's got dark next to it. This is the thing. So if it's not got any dark next to it, you won't see where the light is, quite poetically. Right, back down here to the pond. I'm going to use some of my light aqua to put a bit of blue in, but as I've said, there's not a lot of blue in that sky, so we have to actually put in the colours that are in the sky. So orange, there's some of the pink, the anthraquinoid pink, excuse me, there is an N in it, that I used in the sky. Let's see, we can also increase this. When you've finished a picture, you can see what the colours look like, and until you do, see, even with this white around here, it's quite sort of odd, because until you have other things to measure your colours against, like darks and lights elsewhere in the picture, you can't tell if something has to be done up here or something has to be done down here. It's all just the same. And you sort of get that same effect with Passepartout as well, because it's white, so this brings out colours. It's amazing when you frame a picture to see from here to if you were to overlay it and actually start looking at framing it and you put it into an actual frame. It's amazing how it brings out other colours that are in there that you've put there, but now all of a sudden they're very, very evident. And I really like that. And that's where a good picture framer can help you too if you are framing, because let's get a sharpener here, because they can help you to work out which colour frame would suit what you've actually done. And it's quite important. It's an art in itself. Right, I'm using some yellow ochre here, my quickly disappearing yellow ochre, and I'll increase it in the sky as well. Again, keeping it a bit streaky, a little bit there, and then back to Chinese white. Chinese white is the best to get everything to blend together. Just hoping I've still got that on camera. So sort of blending it all together and burnishing. Burnishing is done with a pencil that is lighter than the colours that are under it. So white is of course the gold standard. Just bringing this sun disc out now and increasing the glow. I've got to push that down. You can see here little holes. That's where there's a bit of texture in the paper, and behind that is the wet gouache. Gouache, wet medium like gouache or acrylic gouache or watercolour, will sink into those little divots in the paper, whereas colour pencil will brush over the top of it, which is great because that's how you get some of these textures. But sometimes I don't want that. I want this to be flattened right down. And as you will know with paper, there's so much it'll take and then it will stop taking it when you flatten the key. But that's what I want there, because I want a proper glow. Just come in, make sure this has still got a bit of variation. The edges of ponds are almost always slightly darker. This is a bit of a swamp actually, because it's gone out into the actual field, but that's all right too. So this is my forest pencil. And again, sandwich the layers between some more white. Up here, we might have some white as well while I've got that in my hands, because that light will be coming in from everywhere. There'll be a bit of shade here. So back to forest, because that is making a long shadow here. Shadows in the evening are long. Some people don't like them. And people with dementia are especially agitated in the evening. It's called sundowning, actually. The perspective of feeling slightly agitated, and people without dementia don't get this, but people who have got dementia, if you're caring for somebody who has dementia, Alzheimer's or anything like that, you'll find that they're a lot more restless and agitated, and just their challenging behaviours are far more pronounced at sunset when the shadows are long. It's interesting as a phenomenon, actually. And yeah, it's also the reason why a lot of horror movies are so atmospheric, because of the light and the lighting. And the lighting technicians know about changing the lighting to suit the mood that they want to convey, the same way that the musicians and the people who arrange the music for a movie also know what they're doing. And the combination of those two things can make us feel real fear, even though we're sitting safely in our sitting rooms or in a cinema. You get the feeling that there's something to be afraid of, and it's all trick of the light sometimes. Interesting. I find it interesting. I guess it may be a little sad what I find interesting, but yeah, it's all about science. Right, so that's probably about what I would do here. Got enough yellow in there, probably enough light, white as well. I don't want to do an absolute disc here to mimic that, because that's where we sort of get into the realms of kitsch. I've got two more things I want to do on this picture. Number one is with my sepia 50% Caran d'Ache. I want to increase some of the dark at the top where it's getting a bit darker, because as the sun goes down, it sort of pulls the darkness down in the sky like a blind coming down. This is too grainy at the moment, but we just want to map it out a bit, and also aware that I'm going to lose some of that. But just adding some streaks and interest up here. And they've, of course, got to come down, because it's not actually a blind that's got a definite start and a definite finish. And to get rid of some of that streakiness, white is a good option, Chinese white. But not to get rid of the streakiness, but some of the graininess, because I want to just knock that back a bit whilst keeping it at the same time. It's all about having your cake and eating it too. So you can then go back over the top of the white and see if it will take any more. Some of it will get to the point where it just says, no, that's enough. You had your chance. You kept knocking it back. I'm not doing it. Whatever you do, every time you see a pattern emerging, break the pattern. So if you see yourself doing just too much and it looks too even both sides, like I said, if you use this on this side, you use it that side. If you use green here, balance it with green there, that sort of thing. Those are pretty good rules to follow to keep everything neat. But if you see an absolute pattern, get rid of it, because that just wouldn't occur in nature. I'm now using an oil pastel, and I'm going to use it to make a little bright sun disc. Please make sure my fingers are clean first. Yes, that one is. I use my fingers a lot in my work, so there's always a bit of stuff on something. That's just to make a nice bright glow and make it as nice, and it's as bright and white as I can get it. And because I'm going to frame this, I don't have to fix it, but otherwise I could use a fixative. And that will stop it from smearing, and it'll take years to dry otherwise. But that is about what I would do here with this picture. That's about finished. So I hope you enjoyed that, and you got something from it. And like I said, don't forget, use your offcuts, but do check first to make sure that you're cutting a standard size. And if you like my work, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave me a comment. And if you really would like to see more and learn a little bit more about the way I paint and the way I teach, have a look at my Patreon. there are huge amounts of videos there now, and it represents excellent value. At around €6.50 a month, you start getting access to all of those videos. So, and there are other bits and bobs as well. So yeah, I shall see you again next Monday, all going well. And bye for now. Have a happy day, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.